Reddit by Reddit recap. What is the most disturbing thing a teacher has done in class? My 11th grade physics teacher was quite a character. Someone once threw a rock at the lab window during class, and he proceeded to stop talking mid-sentence, sprint across the room, launch himself over the tables lining the back wall, vault out the window down a 6-foot drop and chase the kid down. We thought he was handing out a referral. He told the guy to stop throwing things and have a nice day. High school Spanish teacher vomited in the middle of a lesson on my friend's scene who was sitting in the front row. It looked like a bunch of ramen noodles. It looked like she didn't chew because they were intact. There was no warning too. It went from the conjugation of the verb bleg. She apologized and ran out of the room. We were left alone for the rest of the period, half the students laughing and half mortified. Poor scene. When I was first grade there was an actual fire and my teacher fled the classroom and left us alone. We were standing around in the classroom until two very shocked firefighters entered the room who radioed for backup and helped us out of the first floor window. I remember seeing the fire chief screaming an expletive tirade at our teacher, like sergeant does to recruit. Last week, my friend was flipping a Mr. Pibb bottle in English class. My teacher came over and grabbed the bottle out of midair and left the room. When he came back, he set the bottle on the table in front of us. It was filler. Then when he left, the Pibb was a lighter color and it was very warm. He probably just filled it with warm water from the sink, but I would not be surprised if he actually urinated in the bottle. When I was teaching, another guy, who was a disbarred lawyer, called a girl up to the front of the classroom and had her twirl around and then said something to the effect of all the boys are really happy you dressed like that today. Almost surprisingly, that got him canned. Also, the priest at my church tells the story of a professor of his at SUNY who was a total alcoholic. One day he's late for class. The classroom is in the basement of the building, with windows high on the wall that are at ground level on the outside and are at the bottom of a small slope from the sidewalk. Someone notices that here comes the professor on the sidewalk, except that instead of continuing down the sidewalk and entering the building, he veers off the sidewalk and starts walking down the slope. He proceeds to fall down, roll down the slope until he bumps into the windows, opens the window, climbs in, and proceeds to start lecturing. I wasn't in the class, but we had a very strange physics teacher at my high school. Apparently, one day he was getting too loud while teaching, and the science teacher from next door came in to ask him to quiet down, since her kids had a test. In response, he pushed her into the lab room storage room and locked the door. He locked another teacher in a closet and then just went back to his screamy teaching method. A student from the other class came looking for their teacher and let her out. It was a whole thing, and that physics teacher was fired by the end of the week. Had an English substitute teacher, first year of college. It was attached to a high school, who farted crazy loud all of the time. None of us wanted to say anything thinking maybe she had some disease. One day some younger kid walks his get a full blast and immediately cups his hands to his face and go ugh. She chews him out saying how passing gas is natural, she doesn't believe people should hold it in, etc. Basically by the end of her rant all the sympathy from 2 weeks of thinking this poor woman was whipped away, and she basically admitted she has nothing wrong with her, she is just disgusting. I had a gym teacher in HS who had the class do leg lifts during calisthenics and he'd walk up and down the row looking up girls' shorts. But if you thought that was pervy, I had a friend who was a girl, but not a girlfriend, who said her gym teacher would make you open your towel up and show her that you showered after class. If she didn't think you showered well enough, she'd take your towel and send you back to the showers with a pat on the butt where she'd watch. I once exclaimed oh my god in a private school after dropping my pencil case making a huge mess. The teacher was very shocked and didn't speak to me for the rest of the day and would ignore me when I spoke. The next day of school my class was empty except for the teacher, who came in late with an almost too happy look on her face. She grabbed me by the arm and brought me to another room, where the rest of the class was sitting in a circle holding hands. She placed me in the center and they all started praying for me so that the demons could leave my soul. She sent a letter to my parents that night written in crayon that said she would be praying for me that night. I was in grade 2. Had a male teacher show up visible wasted. During class he would discreetly sip from a bottle. He eventually got so drunk that he lost his balance while sitting and broke his arm from the fall. For an 8th grade mind this was rather funny, but nowadays thinking about the alcohol abuse and stories that were behind it is just sad. Him dying 3 years later after drunkenly falling down a set of stairs makes it even more disturbing. Well, this isn't what a teacher did, it is still an interesting story. Some kids decided it would be funny to dose the home ec teacher's coffee with some LSD. She made it into the next period before she was found crawling down the hall to the administration office. She was absent for a week after the incident. The kid who did it was busted and expelled from the school. My history teacher would call everyone a commie if we got a question wrong or did something disruptive. I don't know exactly what he did, but it was obvious he took part in the Vietnam War. Every morning we would have to say the Pledge of Allegiance and he would take points off our grade if we didn't stand up straight, have our feet together, forgot to take off our hat, etc. I'm Vietnamese with the most common last name, so he definitely knew I was Vietnamese. Finally took the courage to answer a question in class. I was extremely shy, and he didn't like my answer. Called me a commie, and I told him that I didn't appreciate him calling that given my background. My teacher laughed, walked over to my desk, and looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Well, that's too bad, you damn commie." I had just graduated from high school, and went back to school to get some papers. I ran across my math teacher, we chatted for a little while, and he invited me to play tennis later that week. I said yes, it sounded like fun. You know, with a teacher you feared until a few months back. My mum drove me to the club, but he never showed up. I went back home and called him to know what happened. It was before cell phones, so I had to call his house. His wife answered and said she knew nothing about it. Later that night, he called back, and it turned out he was mad at me because I let his wife know he had planned to see me. Lost a large chunk of innocence that day. I also had a teacher who believed in homeopathic medicine. She got a decent sized cut one day falling and hitting her arm along a drawer, think seeing significant meat, and came back 2 days later. She had this weird bandage and there was leaves and shit sticking out. About 2 more days and her arm was incredibly weak, so she got a sling. The next week she came in and stunk. It was just this putrid rolling think smell. The following smell was still there, her eyes were sunken, and she was breathing weird. By the end of the day she passed out and was, against her will, taken to the hospital. Her nephew was in my gym and told us the rest. It turns out she elected not to get stitches and decided she'd drive home, pack a half-inch cut with honey and various herbs. She then wrapped the arm up. Humans are not meant to have a wound full of crap, so her body said fuck that. The whole cut was rotten. She was deemed, due to a high temperature, not to be able to make decisions on her own and basically asked her mother if they can do real medicine. The mother said yes, and they cut a sizable chunk of flesh out, pumped her full of medicine, and about a week later she was out. Want to know the real kicker? She stopped speaking to her mother for almost 2 years because she allowed doctors to pump poison into her. Soon after she got fired for cursing out the principal over him calling an ambulance and threatened to sue him. Had a kindergarten teacher at the Lutheran school I was at who was psychotic. She paddled kids and threatened to hold me back a year. I started a year earlier than the other kids, so I was like 4 if I didn't learn to tie my own shoes. Yeah, and Dapper Dan was no help. Anyway, we had to assemble these stupid construction paper flags, where the pole was a wrapping paper roll, and the stripes were made out of construction paper linked together. We had to cut out white stars for the field. I had problems making mine, and a girl showed me the pentagram way to trace it on one side and flip it over. Still had trouble. I looked at the kid next to me. He was a dark-skinned exchange student from Israel. His stars had 6 points. Know where this is going? Then stop reading now. Before I can say hey, I thought they were supposed to be 5-pointed. The teacher comes up and throws a raging fit. That is not how you make a star. You never ever make a star like that. She dug into him excessively. He looked at me with this panicked look and started to cry. His crying caused me to cry. She spun on me and got crazy on me. "What are you crying for? Stop it now." She took us both out and punished us. I heard the kid had some kind of disease like lupus and his kidneys failed, and he died a year and a half later. By then, he was already gone due to the health issues. I remember the one teacher in the next grade telling us about it. I looked back and thought how sad he had a short life with such a hideously confusing and traumatic thing thrown at him. When I heard the teacher was dying of cancer much later, I was tempted to visit her in the hospital, stand over her, call her a B***TCH, and spit on her. Yet, I'm glad that didn't happen. When I was in kindergarten, we had a system where, if you had 5 connector cubes, I honestly don't remember what they were building blocks that went together, you got 30 minutes of free times after nap time. If you were bad, you lost a cube, and you lost a few minutes of free time. If you were good, you could get extra cubes, and cut nap time short to play quietly, while the others finished. If you didn't feel like napping, but weren't allowed to play, you had to sit at the front with the teacher and watch everyone else play. It actually wasn't that bad, and only a few kids missed out on 5 minutes maximum of playtime due to bad behavior. So we had a substitute one day, who was on a power trip with a bunch of 5-year-olds. Asked to go potty, and didn't say may I? Lose a cube. Elbows on the table? Lose a cube. Spell a word wrong? Lose a cube. On and on and on. And she was nasty with it, got into our faces, yelling, spittle everywhere, marching us to our table of cubes, and making a show of us losing one. Crying meant you lost another. I remember that day was the first time I'd ever lost a cube, and I'd lost all 5. I wasn't the only one. In fact, only one girl managed to keep some, by simply being quiet, and not going potty. So instead of a 30-minute nap and 30 minutes of play, there was an hour of sniffled, silent crying, and Karen spent half of it in the corner, silently playing by herself, while the teacher watched. Apparently another teacher walked by during this prolonged nap time, and told the principal. Lady principal came in, asked to talk to the sub, and our vice principal took over for the rest of the day. We didn't have that sub again. My high school math teacher broke down sobbing one day in class because her sister had been on a small boat in the Caribbean which was taken over by pirates and she and her husband were most likely murdered. My teacher was going to have to try to gain custody of the kids. Walked into my junior year trig class early one time. The class was right after lunch. Found my teacher with her head mostly down, an open bottle of whiskey, and a small, empty drinking glass on her desk. She looked up. I smiled. She casually opened her desk and deposited the glass and bottle within, without breaking eye contact. "What did you see here today, Adengaden?" "Lesson preparation." "Good." And that's how I passed junior trig. Best comment of the day. Had this guy for HS math. He was a bitter, cynical, and a sadist. He enjoyed making fun of kids, and heckled them every time they got something wrong even though he sucked at teaching. One day he buys a sledgehammer. It's an orange rubber coated dead blow. And he started smacking kids' desks with it who were asleep. He said it was what made his day. So one day, he actually breaks the corner off a desk. The kid got some splinters and reported it. The teacher gets scolded, and he decides to downgrade to a smaller version. One where he can use the metal part of the hammer. He does it so hard that the kid jumped up and hit his knees on the desk. He had bruises. Then a couple days later, the cops show up. He shoos them out. So they stand outside the classroom and wait for the kids to leave and ask them what's been going on. Teachers gets punished and cameras are installed in his class. He then hated us so much for ratting on his ass, he would just sit at his desk and yell at us each time he had one of us go up to the whiteboard and embarrass the shit out of us. No one was safe from his malice.